Hello, good morning everybody. Nice to see you all. So my name's Kelly and I work with ADHD, ASD, Norfolk. And today we're going to talk about the neuroscience of ADHD. There's going to be a chance at the end to ask questions if anybody's got any. If I start talking too quickly, just pop your hand up or give me a wink and I'll try and slow down a little bit. So we'll start at the beginning. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental difference that causes differences in brain growth, development and function. The key differences of ADHD brain can affect thinking, behaviour and emotions. But prior to this, we'll start with ADHD. So it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But what we know is that actually ADHD isn't a deficit of attention. It's having too much attention on too many things all at once. And we know that ADHD is not caused by poor parenting, too much sugar, too many video games. It is actually proven by science that there are differences in the brain structure, the growth, the development, and the way that the brain works, which causes the symptoms that come with ADHD. So the symptoms of ADHD are primarily related to inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, or a combination of both. So we have the three different types of ADHD. We have inattentive type ADHD, which used to be known as ADD. We then have the hyperactive impulsive type of ADHD, and then we have the combined type of ADHD. So the hyperactivity and impulsivity is most commonly seen in young children, and inattention is more commonly seen in children and adolescents, but this isn't a solid rule. You can see it at any age. But what we also know about hyperactivity is that it's only a very small percentage of the ADHD population that displays outward hyperactivity. For lots of people, it's an internal state of restlessness because we can hold on to lots of hyperactivity very young, not wanting to be moving around in classrooms, not wanting to be seen as being different. And if we hold in the body's drive to move around, the only place all of that energy goes is inwards and upwards. So we can then have a restless cognition with a brain that's bouncing around all over the place. So understanding the science of ADHD can really help improve the quality of life, academic work, performance, relationships and outcomes of people with ADHD. The science of ADHD has always been really important to me. When I got diagnosed, I really wanted to know what it meant and how it was affecting me and my body and what was causing me to make some of the decisions that I was making. And I find that when people get diagnosed with lots of other medical conditions, they get to find out what it means and what's going on and what they need. But it doesn't always work the same way with neurodiversity. We're kind of given the diagnosis and then it's kind of off you go. We can see the behaviours that come with ADHD and we can see the reasons that led to diagnosis, but not the things that are causing them. So today we're going to just cover about some of those differences in the brain, in the neurobiology of somebody with ADHD to see why we're seeing some of the symptoms that we're seeing. So researchers have reported that parts of the ADHD brain will mature at a slower rate than a neurotypical person. So it's been said many a time that I am a lot younger than my years. A nearly 40-year-old woman, I probably don't always act like it. But again, this doesn't go for everybody, but we do see lots of ADHD people fun, full of life, and maybe not always acting their age. But the science has shown again that the brain is maturing at a slower rate than a neurotypical person's is. It's also shown that the brain is smaller than the non-ADHD brain. And this is only a very small amount, but the science again has shown in imaging studies that the brain with somebody with ADHD is smaller and there's fewer connections between different parts of the brain and the regions, which we're going to go on to show you some pictures of to make it more sense. So research also suggests that parts of the brain, the amygdala and the hippocampus, are smaller in the brains of people with ADHD. Now I know these are big words, but stick with me and we'll show you some pictures of the brain and you'll be able to see what I mean. But these different areas of the brain are responsible for things like emotional processing and impulsivity. So the science is showing that these two different parts of the brain are different in ADHD. So it's the differences in the neurobiology that are causing the differences in emotional processing and impulsivity. It's not because of a default in the child or the person or the parenting or the sugar. It's differences in the brain structure and function that's causing the differences that they have. So the ADHD brain does not have the neural organisation to self-regulate and to stop automatic responses. So that's that impulsivity there, saying things quickly, doing things without thinking. So in other words, the ADHD brain is built to respond impulsively to its environment, making it hard to do the things it needs to do day in and day out. ADHD can involve changes in blood flow to different parts of the brain, which means less blood flow means less brain function. Okay, and here we go, we get to see the picture of the brain here divided up into all the different sections. Now, each different section is responsible for different actions for different senses, and the brain is divided into different areas called lobes. So the part of the front of the brain here behind the forehead is called the frontal lobe, and this is one of the areas that is predominantly impacted by ADHD. And that's the part of the brain that helps us to organise, plan, pay attention and make decisions. And these are called our executive functions. So executive functions are your life skills, and these are the things that people with ADHD struggle with. We're going to cover what they are on the next page. But again, this helps us to see, all proven by science, differences in the frontal lobe that affect our emotions, our attention, and our behaviour. Here they are. So executive functions include impulse control. So how we control and regulate how we feel, so we can motivate ourselves, set goals for ourselves. We have planning and prioritising, so knowing what to do and when to do it, knowing what order to put things in. Taking the time to think about the information that we need, to do it in what order, and to create plans to make pieces of work. We've got self-monitoring, so knowing where you are and where you're up to in a task and what you need to do next. Working memory, remembering lots of information at the forefront of your mind to complete a task or problem solve. We have task initiation, so getting going, getting yourself ready to start a task and knowing what you need, not just starting it on a whim without all the extra stuff that you need to get going, so thinking things through. Flexible thinking, changing how you think or working to meet the demands of a task. Emotional control, so managing our feelings to complete the tasks at hand. And goal setting, so understanding and motivating ourselves to do the things we need to get done. These are all of our executive functions which we need every day to get things done. So we're going to talk about neurotransmitters next. So neurotransmitters are the chemical messengers that fire around the brain to get us to take action. They're the things that help us to regulate our emotions, our attention and our behaviour. And so this is an image of a neurotypical person. It's one I've made myself. It's not too scientific, so please don't judge me on it. But it's just to show that in the brain, we've got lots and lots of synapses, which are the purple things here. And in between the synapses, we have loads and loads of neurotransmitters. So these messages are firing all of the time to say, filter out that noise, say this, say that, let the other person talk, get that job done. And this neurotypical person has lots and lots of neurotransmitters firing around in their brain. So they know what they need to do, when they need to speak, when they need to take action, how to plan a task from start to finish, not just get started with it. They can regulate their attention, their behaviour and their emotions because of the current flow of neurotransmitters that go around the brain. If we go backwards as well, they've also got that larger brain size and lots of blood flow going on. So neurotypical people tend to have much more regulated attention, behaviour and emotions. Now, when we compare it to somebody with ADHD, we can wipe out a lot of those neurotransmitters because science has shown that there are a lot less connectivity and a lot less neurotransmitters in the brain of somebody with ADHD. Specifically, we are lacking in dopamine, serotonin and norepinephrine, which are the things that help us to regulate our attention, our behaviour and our emotions. They're the same chemicals that help us to get up, to get going, to feel the other signals in the body, to know when we're getting upset quickly, to know when we're getting overwhelmed with things, to know what to say to people and what not to say. So there's certain things that help us with ADHD to create more neurotransmitters, to get the connectivity working in the brain. And the first one is interest. What we know when we speak to people with ADHD is when they're interested in the subject, they're interested in the person, they're interested in the place that they're in, that we see a lot more improvements in attention, behaviour and emotions. Interest drives everything. Many of the children we see in clinic will say that they get on really well in lessons that they love, with teachers they love, because they're interested in what they're doing. They have lots of activity in their brain, so they can help regulate how they're feeling and behave in what society would say is an acceptable way. But when we take away the interest, we see complete differences in the behaviour. So often it can appear that people with ADHD can be very self-centred and only do what they want to do. Our child is wonderful when we take them to what they want to do because they're interested, so they can get up early, they can get what they need, they can get out of the door on time. But when it's something somebody else wants to do, completely different child is seen. But because they're not interested and they're not going to gain from the thing that they're doing, the brain's activity just disappears. And this has been proven by science. It's not just me saying it. There are brain scans to show when people with ADHD aren't interested in what they're doing, it is very difficult to pay attention, to manage your emotions and behave appropriately. So the second one we have is reward. Now this is a short-term reward, not a long-term reward. People with ADHD don't respond to, well, if you do this now, in 6 weeks' time, you can have this. It doesn't activate the brain, it doesn't activate the prefrontal cortex and get all of the chemicals going. It has to be an instant reward, a quick reward. If you can do this for me now, this is what's going to come. And that by no means is a suggestion for me to say reward your child for everything or your adult, motivate them by giving them things all of the time. But if we reflect on it, if we love and live with somebody with ADHD, we can see that actually short-term rewards work really well. If we think in an adult we have a to-do list of things to do, we will often go for the things that give us the quickest reward, that make us feel good, that get done the quickest, because it activates that same kind of feeling in the brain. Next one up, urgency. I find this one difficult to describe in children, so I'll do it with an adult. Me, myself, I can have a week off work and really struggle to get motivated, struggle with those executive functions, to know what I need to do, to tidy my house. I can often do everything but the things that I'm supposed to be doing. But when we add in a sense of urgency, so my mum will text me and say, Kelly, I'm coming round in 10 minutes, I can miraculously clean the whole house. I can get everything I need done. If we think about a project for university, I can have 6 months to do it, 6 weeks to do it. It's not going to get done till the night before, because until I have that sense of urgency, none of the neurotransmitters are firing down in the part of my brain that I need to get those executive functions going to get the job done. So people with ADHD can often work quite well under pressure or under deadlines, or people cutting things down to say, right, I need this from you now, rather than leaving really long periods of time. And this is often why we see people with ADHD in roles in the fire service, the police service, places where there's lots of stuff going on all of the time, lots of urgency, because it really helps to activate this area of the brain here and help us to work at our best. The next one is novelty. So this can be in friendships, it can be in hobbies, it can be new clothes, it can be all sorts of different things, but people with ADHD are drawn to novelty. They are living with an understimulated brain that is constantly seeking out novelty and stimulation, because the lack of chemicals means we have a lack of stimulation to one of the biggest organs in our body. So we're constantly looking for something new to feel good. So we may have cupboards full of things that we've started and not finished because we're drawn to the novelty of the new hobby or the new activity or the new item. But as soon as we get it, the chemicals drop off and then we start all over again. I'm hoping this is starting to make sense with the novelty thing. Again, it can be friendships. So lots of people we see will friendship hop around groups because, again, there's the novelty of the new group creating all of the stimulation, all of the blood flow, everything we need. It feels amazing. Then after a week or two, it's a bit boring because the dopamine's dropped off. And now we need to find a new friendship group to get involved in with maybe some new drama or new something going on to create that sense of feeling calm in the brain. Because it's important to note that emotional and physical pain feel the same way to the body. So if your brain is understimulated, it's not getting the blood flow it needs and your emotions are all over the place, it can feel the same as physical pain. So we are constantly seeking out things to help us feel better, and it may be in terms of something new and something exciting. And the last one is competition. Now, not everybody will relate to this, but we often see people with ADHD are incredibly competitive because it does the exact same thing, helps drive those chemicals to the brain. So things like, I bet you can't do this quicker than me will often work. I bet you can't do that quicker than your sibling, which again isn't a great parenting advice to compare the two, but we can often see that competition drives us. We had a multiple choice questions quiz at university last year, and I just remember this sense of dread the day that I turned up, thinking I'm never going to remember it, because to remember all that information I learned, I need good executive function, I need my brain firing to bring back all that information to where I need it, and it wasn't happening. Everything just went dead. It had all gone. But on the next slide, it was a competition. Well, obviously I won, not because I remembered it all and the brain came back, but I was able to work really quickly, efficiently to find the information that I needed to make sure that I was getting the answers I needed, because I'm driven by competition. I love to win and to prove that I can be the best. And it's all to do with my brain structure. Obviously, it's to do with personality traits as well. But what we know is that competition drives the activity to the prefrontal cortex to help us to perform at our best. So we will often strive to be winning at lots of things. Don't challenge me to anything, because I will beat everyone. I'm joking. You're supposed to laugh. Okay, so to show it back into our pictures here, when we see that we add in the 5 things here, interest, reward, urgency, novelty, and competition, we start to see this activation in the prefrontal cortex, this area behind your eyes here, which can help the person with ADHD to perform at their best. And again, when we take those things away, we see a decrease in the chemicals and we can see a decrease in how we're feeling. With adults, it can be experiencing low mood and anxiety. And again, with children, it can be disruptive behaviour. It can be withdrawing. And more often than not, we are lacking some of the things that we need. So we send a child to ADHD or with ADHD off to school, and they've got a lesson of triple English, and English is hard for them and they're not interested in it. And then there's a short break, and then they've got double history, which again is hard. And we see that when they get home, we're having these huge disruptive behaviours or meltdowns, but they've had a whole day of things they're not interested in with no reward, because they're not going to be getting praised for anything in those lessons, because they're finding it hard to pay attention because the things they need aren't coming. So at this point, we might have a child lying on their desk with their head on their desk. They just cannot function. There's nothing coming. Their attention's not there. And they're then punished for it or sent out or sent off to inclusion. But on the flip side, we have a child with, I'll use my niece for an example, diabetes, lying on the table, and somebody says to her, what do you need? Well, I need some insulin. I need something to help me get better. But the child with ADHD is sent off to inclusion to be punished for something that hopefully now you're starting to see is out of their control. It's in their control when they know that their neurobiology is different and they know what they need, but just to be told you have ADHD isn't enough. They need to know that actually the reason I can't pay attention and the reason I'm feeling disruptive at the moment is because my brain is lacking the stimulation it needs to function. I need something to feel better, because when you know what you need, you can take responsibility. But if you don't know, you can't take any responsibility. And in this scenario, if we had the teacher perhaps involve the child in their interests or give them a task to do where they can move around to get some activation going in their brain, we will see differences in their behaviour. Right, I'm on time, aren't I? So the best support for ADHD is a multimodal approach in which those with ADHD receive lots of different interventions. A combination of medication, lifestyle and diet changes, and psychotherapy are proven to be the most effective approaches to managing ADHD. Now, it's not one or the other, it's a mixture of lots of different things, because if we go back a slide, and we'll go all the way back to here, it's not just the 5 things that we've shown you here that can improve the connectivity of the prefrontal cortex. Regular sleep is really, really important to help keep those chemicals nice and regulated. Aerobic exercise, so getting outside, getting your body moving helps activation to the prefrontal cortex. Lots of rest, again, with the sleep. But a good varied diet. Sugar will overload the prefrontal cortex with chemicals. So lots of children and adults with ADHD are really drawn to sugary things, energy drinks. Again, we're looking at the novelty, but we're looking at the chemical side of things, thinking the quickest way to get dopamine into here can be through sugar. It can be through being oppositional. You know, if I cause an argument at home when I'm feeling like this because I've had triple science and triple English and the day's been really hard and I come home and cause an argument, I'm going to get lots of activity in the prefrontal cortex and I'm going to start to feel better. Because actually I don't know what's going on, I don't know why I feel how I feel, but I know I feel better after the argument and now you've given me a reason for why I feel cross because you've argued with me. Whereas in actual fact, my neurobiology has been all over the place today and probably what I needed was a cuddle and some rest and someone to say, you know, I know you've done your best here. And as we're all adults in the room, we'll continue talking about things like smoking, drinking, gambling, addictive behaviours. We can see a surge in the chemicals and the reason why we are quite addictive personalities with ADHD. Again, I'm not saying it's about everybody, but some people with undiagnosed ADHD can be drawn to these types of things because they are looking to stimulate the prefrontal cortex. But the way that this works is the dopamine rushes in, the same with our sugar, but then it rushes back out again. They're not sustained levels of chemicals to the brain. They're things that give us a quick hit and then they drop off. But knowing about ADHD and knowing about our neurobiology means that we can make lifestyle changes that help us to keep these chemicals nice and regulated. We know that ADHD and autism, they don't get better and worse over the years. The environment changes. So when we're seeing lots of negative behaviours and difficulty paying attention, more often than not, the environment we're in isn't conducive for our prefrontal cortex. It's not working for us. It's not keeping the dopamine levels nice and steady. Perhaps we're not eating the right types of food. Perhaps we're not in a restful environment. But we can make all of these changes and look at things when we know that everything around us affects our neurobiology and our brain functioning. Okay, So I know that I've spoken really quickly and come up short, but this is it for me. I'd like to take any questions if anybody's got any questions. I think if I spoke at a nice slower rate, it would have took a little bit longer, but I feel like I talk really quickly because I'm just so nervous. But does anybody have anything they'd like to ask?
You used the word quick fix.
Yes.
Isn't medication a quick fix?
Oh, can we stop recording so I don't get in trouble for anything I say? No, so if we look at it as a picture, medication isn't for everybody. And as somebody with ADHD who has tried various medications and tried lifestyle changes and overall, it really isn't for everybody. But what medication will aim to do is to level out this level of chemicals. So if we're talking about a stimulant medication, it will provide activity to the prefrontal cortex. So it will help you to pay attention, manage your behavior and regulate your emotions. So we can see it as a quick fix, or we can see it as a way of supporting these chemicals. But medication aside, if we were having lots of aerobic exercise, a great diet, and we're in the right environment, we may not need it. It's finding that balance of understanding. So clinically, we will see people that come in and they only want medication and they don't want to know about their brain and they don't want to talk about their lifestyle and what they're doing to impact the activity that's going on in their brain. They don't want to do those things. So for them, I would say it's a quick fix. And it's something that personally I do find quite difficult, because the more we can understand about ourselves and what we're doing that cause the behaviours and the feelings and the emotions that we have, the more control again we can take. If we're just going to take medication and expect it all to be fixed, it's not going to work, is it? But it doesn't mean that it doesn't work for lots and lots of people. There's the non-stimulant medications as well that can be taken and they stay within the body. So a stimulant will shoot the chemicals in and then drop off after a set amount of hours. There's various different ones. I'm not sure how much everybody knows about medication. And non-stimulants will stay in the body longer, and what they're doing is aiming to increase this connectivity in the brain to help us to function as best we can throughout the day. But all of those other things we do around it are just as vital, and that's the kind of psychoeducation element of it, is understanding what are we doing to support ourselves, how much can we learn about what we need to be able to then talk to our teachers and talk to the people around us to say, this is what helps lift my dopamine up and this is what takes it out. As an adult, I'm able to know who's a dopamine drainer, who do I leave and I cannot function after I've been with them, what environments are good, what environments are bad. You know, I think I was born to just sit on a beach. And I know that my ADHD has got incredibly so much worse since I've had my children, and that was when my diagnosis came, but that was when my executive functions were tested to the max. It was hard enough to manage myself and my daily living and getting up and getting going and knowing what I needed to do when. And then I added 3. I didn't even stop at 1. I added 3 into the mix, and now I've got to manage what they need and get them where they need to be. So it feels a constant stretch of things. But what we've been able to do with our diagnosis is to be able to say, right, what do I need? What help do I need? I know when things are getting tricky that something's kind of falling off. And juggling with ADHD is hard, but we need these people around us and this knowledge to be able to take control and make things better. Does that make sense? Mm. That was a long question, or a long answer to a short question, I'm sorry. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to ask? Yeah.
I'm just making an assumption here, but you said you got diagnosed when you had your children.
Yes.
So do you think that if you're diagnosed sooner, your life would be a bit different?
Yeah. Oh, God, I feel like I'm going to burst into tears. Yeah, getting diagnosed is a real grief and loss process. But yeah, I do. I look back at childhood and lots of the struggles that I had in school and the difficulty making and maintaining friendships and learning. I genuinely thought I was stupid. Why was it so hard for me to manage all of this stuff? And then I went out into the big wide world trying a lot harder than I should do to do very normal things. So I think that if I was to have gone back and had that knowledge in childhood, everything could have been different from the parenting to my knowledge of myself. I spent around 13 years in the mental health system trying various medications and therapies I feel really emotional now, to try and work out what was wrong with me. And it wasn't until I met somebody with ADHD by chance that said, whoa, you have ADHD. And I ended up getting diagnosed and understanding myself that my life began to change. I was able to take control and realise it's not a default in me, it's not something I've done wrong or my mum's done wrong or anyone else has done wrong, other than my genetics. So we know that ADHD is predominantly genetic, so it made my mum's life make sense after diagnosis. But I was really able to take control and learn more and know that actually having lots of friends and a job that didn't suit me was pulling me down. So I think that the earlier we see people And the earlier we can help people understand why they do what they do, why they feel the way that they feel, it can drastically change the outcomes for the rest of their lives. But I also understand that it can be covered up really well. When we talked about the hyperactivity elements of it earlier, girls look completely different to boys. If we're not running around destroying everything, well, we can't possibly have ADHD. If we come from a wealthy family, we can't possibly have ADHD. There's all these misconceptions about it, which is ultimately why today is so important, to try and help people to understand that ADHD is so much more than people realise, and it doesn't matter where you came from, what your upbringing was like, anything other than lots of genetics really that factor into this neurodevelopmental difference that for some people won't show until they have children. For other people it may show in that transition period between year 6 and year 7, when we go from primary school where things are nice and scaffolded for us by our parents and by our teachers. Everything's nice and predictable. There's lots of interest in junior school. But when we go up into then year 7 and we're tested, our executive functions are tested. You have to start remembering your own stuff, navigating lots of communications with others. Everything changes. Those parents have to drop off a little bit and the person has to take charge. That's when we can start to see some differences in behaviour, which then again can be written off as hormones. But ultimately, you can see how this process of diagnosis isn't easy unless you have those really obvious symptoms. But the younger we can pick up on this, the better. But it doesn't go to say that if you're in your 50s, 60s and 70s, which is what we see in clinic every week, people of all ages coming in, just to be able to understand themselves. At the end of every screening, we ask people, why are you here? What do you hope to get from this? And I would say 99% of it when we're looking at an adult is to understand myself, is to have a sense of peace. And I wish we could give lots of people that a lot younger. I'm very emotional right now. Another question?
Is there any data on the hereditary side? Is it dominant recessive? Or?
Yeah, there will be a lot of it. I couldn't tell you off my head now because everything's gone blank, but there is a huge amount of data that shows that predominantly we are looking at genetics when we're looking at ADHD, but not always. Again, it's there can be all sorts of other things that factor in to it, but for me particularly, my diagnosis made my mum's life make sense. In her 60s, to then look at everything that had happened, it does start to help put things together, but you'll be able to find an awful lot of research on it on the internet that's very strong. And everything I've talked to you about today is all proven by science. When the child with ADHD or the adult with ADHD is interested, they're at their best. When they're not, the activity depletes. And the science has also gone on to prove that when you try and concentrate, it gets worse and it comes out quicker. So this information is just everything. It's really, really important. Anybody else? No? Thank you very much for coming, everybody.